Welcome back to the next part of our Intro to Dominion Strategy series. In the first part, we looked at just buying treasures, how that increased the amount of money you were making, how there was this snowball effect to where, if I get a better card early, that lets me get better cards next shuffle, which allows me to get better cards next shuffle, and it builds on itself, right? Here in the second part, we're going to look at ways to get around the limitation we saw in the first part, which was that as you keep adding cards to your deck, each one does less and less because you see each one less and less often. The first thing we want to look at is, instead of just adding cards to our deck, subtracting them. So banish is an event which lets me get rid of bad cards from it lets me get rid of whatever cards from my deck. But you want to obviously do it to get rid of bad cards from your deck. And at the start of the game, your bad cards are estates. Estates make you no money, right? And so there's two ways you can improve your deck: adding good cards and removing bad cards. Estates make you no money, so they're bad cards. They don't do anything for you except score points. You don't need them in your deck. Eventually, you might want the points, but and Banish lets you even keep the points. A lot of the other ways of getting rid of bad cards, you don't get to keep the points. But again, there's this snowball effect. You want to have a better deck early because it lets you get a better deck later. And 1 point from estate usually doesn't mean that much. So you want to get rid of them if you can without it costing you too much. Okay, so let's think about how getting rid of an estate helps your deck. If you get rid of an estate, right, if you add a silver, that adds 2 money to your deck. Your average card was making you whatever it was making you at the start of the game. That's 0.7 money. So you're moving your deck from 0.7 average towards 2 average by adding a card, smoothing out everything, making everything show up a little bit less. If you remove an estate, you are moving away, right? Estate makes 0, so you're moving from 0.7 away from 0. And you're making your deck smaller, which means you see everything more often. So it has this effect where it's changing the denominator, right, basically. And that tends to have a bigger effect than changing the numerator. Now, because at the beginning of the game, 0.7 is closer to 0 than to 2, you actually still do more right on the first couple turns, and on the first couple turns only, by adding a silver than by getting rid of an estate. But if we do a bit of both, we're going to see on this shuffle now I have 10 cards again. If I added 2 silvers, I'd have 12. Now I have 10, and I'm making 9 money. I'm going to make 9 money over 2 turns now. It's either going to be split 6 and 3 or 5 and 4, which means I'm for sure going to hit 5 or more at least once, which is often something that you want to do, although not always the key thing. And I'm going to make 6 sometimes. I'm not going to make 6 as often as if I would have added 2 silvers. Not quite. But it's not that much lower. The other thing to note is once you start adding even a couple silvers, then it switches, and just getting rid of your estates does more to help your deck than adding silvers does. After not very long at all, because your deck is good enough that the estates drag you down more than the silvers propel you upward. So we're going to look at this, and here we can get rid of more estates, so we're going to do that, and now we're already hitting 8. We're going to get more golds, and now, much faster, we're hitting our price point we want to be at, which is province. And we get to... We're going to get rid of the province here even. We're going to get to 4 provinces much, much faster, right? Turn 13 here. This was some pretty good draws. But the point is there's this snowball effect as well as your deck gets better. You know, the snowball effect is still there. But thinning out the bad cards has just a huge, huge impact, right? We also drew pretty well here. So thinning helps a lot. The other thing I want to talk about here is that you can add cards, undo. You can add cards that do more than just make money for you. So we've been adding silver so far, But you can also add cards, which I'm going to talk about first this class of cards we call peddlers after the card peddler. Plus a card, plus an action, plus a money. And silver gives you 2 money. These peddlers only give you 1. But the peddler draws a card, and because it gives you the action back, you can play other actions afterwards too. So it really doesn't hurt you. Because the peddler draws a card, it gives you a money plus whatever the value of the card you drew is. So if the average value of the card you're drawing is less than 1, the silver would be better for you. But if the average value is more than 1, then the peddler is better for you. And again, it doesn't take very long at all after the first couple turns. That extra money that extra card is very quickly going to be better for you than the extra money from the silver. So the other thing, though, about adding peddlers to your deck is, let's just start by adding a whole bunch of them. So if we add just peddlers every turn and do nothing else, what we're going to see is more or less we're shuffling half the turns instead of more turns than that if we would be adding silvers. And, well, there's going to be more variation in our deck. So now we've added 10 peddlers, right? One of them's a poacher, one's a fisherman, one's a peddler, but they all have this plus card, plus an action, plus a money. They all have slightly other effects too. So now we have our 20 card deck, right? If we would have added 10 silvers, we would have had 27 money. It would take us 4 turns to get through the 20 cards, and we'd be making 6.5 a turn. Now that we've added 10 peddlers, we have only 17 money, but because it only takes us 10 turns to get through this, 2 turns to get through this deck, we're going to see that 17 money over 2 turns. In fact, we might see a little bit less because some of the peddlers might be on the bottom of the deck, at which point we won't see them. So, but we're making, close to 8 money a turn here. If a lot of them bottom deck, we might make less than that. And there's obviously a lot of variation. But by adding a card which is cantrips every time, cantrip being a card that gives you a card and action back, and particularly because we're adding peddlers every time, what we've done is we don't have that diminishing returns that we got from the silvers or even from the golds, to where adding each one made you see each card less often. Because those were stop cards, i.e. cards that don't draw, that was a true thing with adding silvers and golds. But adding peddlers, that's not true. There's no diminishing returns because I still see the card just as often, right? And so that's a really important thing to know as you're building your Dominion decks, is that this lets you be very consistent at hitting your price points, and you can be much faster. I took a couple turns off here buying nothing, but I'm already have a better deck than if I would have added silvers. Obviously, you still add a silver in this kind of deck is better than nothing. The one downside I want to point out to adding all these peddlers is, so every card you add does more of an impact because I've added peddlers instead of silvers. That's good if you're adding good cards, which you are for most of the game, but it's bad once I start greening. So, because I see the green cards more often as well, and that does not so good for me. But if I can somehow combine these things, and we'll see this more later, if I can somehow combine these things, then I get a pretty good deck going here. And we can see that even having taken a couple turns off, it didn't take me much longer to get to my 4 provinces. If we start back from the beginning and don't skip buys, so we just prefer our peddlers over silvers, but we still prefer probably early on gold over peddler, and we definitely want to prefer basically gold over peddler. What we're going to see is that pretty often we get this nice feed forward effect, still, this snowbally effect, and we end up in a better place than if we would have just done either one. Obviously, adding a silver is still helping my deck, is I guess the point I'm making here. And yeah, we got to 4 provinces here on turn 14. And okay, well, anyway, the point is, by adding cards which aren't just stop cards, the cards build on each other better. But you are slightly more susceptible to green, so that's one thing. And then by getting rid of your bad cards, that can oftentimes be more helpful than adding good cards. So that's going to do it for part 2 here. Next, we're going to move into part 3, where we're going to be taking these concepts to the next level.